Brittany Carter, and her thesis title is Rates of Smoking and Visitations to Healthcare Facilities Among People Living with HIV in Higher Risk versus Lower Risk Areas in Atlanta, Georgia. Brittany?
By a show of hands, how many of you know your zip code? Okay, relatively easy question, right? Well, for me, I like to think of zip codes as personal identifiers. They not only tell you where you live, but what type of environment you live in. In a research study conducted by Georgia State's own Dr. Richard Rothenberg and colleagues, 10 zip codes in the city of Atlanta were examined to understand networking relationships, geographic closeness, and HIV transmission and maintenance. The people living in these zip codes were considered to be living in higher risk or lower risk areas. These risk areas were determined based on the history of HIV reporting. As pictured on this map here, the zip code circled in red represented higher risk areas, and the zip code circled in blue represented lower risk areas. To put some names to these areas, in the lower risk areas, we have locations such as East Point, College Park, and further down Union City. In the higher risk areas, we have prominent locations in Atlanta, such as areas near the Georgia Dome, near the Fox Theater, Old Fourth Ward, and South Atlanta. My project focuses on two things. First, I'm interested in examining the rates of smoking and visitations to healthcare facilities among people living with HIV in these designated higher risk and lower risk areas. Research has shown that people living with HIV smoke 3 times more than the general population. Smokers living with HIV are more likely to develop lung infections, mouth infections, and heart disease in comparison to non-smokers living with HIV. Second, I'm interested in examining stressors or stressful events that may be associated with smoking. These stressful events can be categorized as homelessness or engaging in physical violence or being threatened with a weapon. Living in high-risk areas may limit access to transportation and access to adequate healthcare services. But living with HIV in these high-risk areas may cause even more health consequences. My project hopes to shed light on the importance of visitations to healthcare facilities and smoking among people living with HIV in Atlanta, in our community, and in our neighborhoods. These zip codes are more than just numbers on a map, more than numbers at the end of our home address. They can determine who we are and what we do. Oftentimes, it's not about how we live our lives, but where we live our lives. So now I would like to ask you once again, how many of you know your zip code?